I never thought a broken espresso machine could start something that would haunt me in ways I couldn't name yet. But there she was leaning over the counter of the hotel lobby, sleeves rolled up, the faintest crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, like she'd been smiling through life's small betrayals and still kept a sense of humor. I'd only been a guest here, passing through on business, thinking I was invisible to everyone except the reception clerk. Then she appeared, a cleaner with a clipboard tucked under one arm, and something about the way she moved made the air feel heavier, slower. I was hunched over the machine, muttering under my breath while pressing buttons that refused to obey. She watched, leaning against the wall, hands folded loosely, one foot tapping against the tile in that subtle rhythm that somehow made me aware of my own awkwardness. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but deliberate. "You might need the filter replaced," she said, as if she'd known this machine longer than anyone should, her eyes flicking to mine with a spark I couldn't place. I laughed, a little too loud. "Yeah, I think I just broke it." She tilted her head, eyebrow raised. "Or maybe it just refuses to work for you." The corners of her lips curved just enough that I couldn't tell if it was teasing or pity, and I felt my stomach tighten without warning. There was a pause, long enough that I realized I'd been staring at her hands brushing along the counter, cleaning as she spoke, but also long enough that I noticed the faint perfume, warm and subtle, almost like cinnamon and something green and alive. I cleared my throat. "Right. Guess I'll leave it to you, then." She smiled, that half smile that didn't give away anything, and moved closer, reaching for the machine. "It's easier if you let someone who knows what they're doing handle it," she said, her voice low enough that I felt it sink straight into my chest. And for a moment, we both stood there, me frozen, her working, and I realized I hadn't even asked her name. Not that it mattered, because somehow, in that quiet space filled with the hum of broken electronics and the faint scent of coffee, I already knew I'd remember her forever. She finished the little repair and looked up at me. Our eyes met, longer this time, and I caught that flicker again, the one that said she saw me differently than anyone else had in a long while. Maybe it was the way her lips pressed together just slightly, like she had something to say but decided against it. Or maybe it was that she didn't move away immediately, leaving me suspended in a strange, electric awareness of her presence. I thanked her, trying to sound casual, fumbling with the words, but she just nodded and returned to her clipboard, writing something down with deliberate precision. I turned back to the machine, half expecting it to explode in my hands, but it didn't matter. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she lingered near me, even just a fraction, and the faint warmth of her gaze that seemed to follow me across the room. Later, when I sat in the corner nursing a coffee that tasted more bitter than it should, I realized that moment, the awkward, small, perfectly mundane moment, had settled into my chest like a secret I wasn't ready to admit. Something unspoken had started here, something quiet and insistent, and I knew I'd spend a long time wondering how it would unfold. Because even now, all I could remember was the tilt of her head, the soft click of her shoes on tile, and the way the room had felt smaller, and somehow brighter, when she was near. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, and yet there she was, hovering over the supply closet in the back hallway of the hotel, tugging at a stubborn box with a frown that made her look both fierce and tired at the same time. I had come back to fix a leaky faucet in the guest lounge, but now I was standing there, caught between wanting to help and wanting to watch her move, quietly, deliberately, like she owned every inch of the space even though she didn't. "Need a hand?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She glanced at me quickly, almost startled, before letting out a short laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've got it," she said, and there was that slight edge in her tone, not dismissive exactly, just careful, like she didn't want me to see anything beyond the surface. I nodded, not wanting to push. So I stood there, pretending to check my phone while I watched the way her hands worked, thickened knuckles brushing against the cardboard, nails slightly chipped from some unseen battle. She paused, exhaling sharply, and I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the faint crease of exhaustion on her forehead. I wondered what kind of life made her move through it all with such a precise, controlled grace. "You always carry boxes like that?" I asked, stepping closer, careful to respect the space she held around herself. She shrugged, almost imperceptibly, and I caught the flicker of vulnerability that crossed her eyes for just a second before she looked away, busying herself with the stubborn tape. That single moment, a hesitation, a breath too long, made my chest tighten. She was letting something slip, even if only for a heartbeat, and I wanted to reach out and make it easier, though I knew she wouldn't let me. Her laugh broke the quiet a few seconds later, small and reluctant, when I tried to joke about the absurdity of stacked boxes in a hotel hallway. It was softer than before, almost shy, and I found myself leaning just a little closer, caught in the pull of how layered she was, how strong, and yet how quietly fragile. I noticed the subtle details, the way her hair fell slightly out of place, the faint scent of soap lingering in her movements, the way she rubbed the back of her neck when she paused. Little things that no one else would see, no one else would care to see. But I did. Somehow, I wanted to see every small piece of her, the grit and the softness, and I hated that she could do that to me without even speaking. Finally, the box gave way with a small, defiant pop. She straightened and turned toward me, brushing her hands on her pants, hair falling across one shoulder. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the hallway felt impossibly narrow. Her lips twitched, like she wanted to smile but didn't trust herself to, and I found myself holding my breath. "You really didn't need to," she started, voice low, hesitant. "I wanted to," I said quietly, and we held each other's gaze for a fraction too long. Then she laughed again, softly, almost ashamedly, and the sound hit me in a way I couldn't name. I realized I hadn't just come back to fix a faucet, I had come back for this tiny, fragile collision of space and attention, where we were just close enough to feel something unspoken, something that made the air between us feel heavier, warmer, electric. The rain started just as the hotel lobby emptied, soft at first, then heavy enough that the fluorescent lights reflected off the wet tiles. I was still there, pretending to straighten the magazines on the front table, though really, I was waiting. Waiting for her to finish the last of her rounds. She appeared a few minutes later, pushing a cart with towels stacked neatly, her jacket draped over her arm, hair damp from the rain that had snuck under the awning. For a moment, we just stood there, both aware of how close we were in the narrow hallway, and I caught the faint smell of soap again, mixed with rain, like she carried a storm inside her. "You've got a lot going on," I said, gesturing vaguely at the cart. She smiled, small, almost reluctant, but didn't reply immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, watching me. I wanted to ask her what that look meant, what it hid, but I swallowed the words. It wasn't my place. Not yet. We walked together toward the back exit, side by side, the silence stretching longer than it should. I noticed her fingers brushing against the cart, and then, accidentally, or maybe not, her hand grazed mine. A spark shot through me that I didn't try to hide. She didn't pull away immediately, just shifted her weight, letting the moment hang like an unanswered question. I opened my mouth to say something I wasn't sure I could, but before the words left me, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, exhaling softly. The screen read a name I didn't know, and the way her shoulders tensed made my stomach twist. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The interruption was enough, a reminder that the world outside this narrow hallway still existed, still demanded her attention. We stepped into the storm briefly, water dripping off her jacket, and I wanted to reach out, to brush the hair from her face, but something in her posture told me she wouldn't accept that. So I let my hand hang by my side, clenched tight, pretending it wasn't trembling just a little. "You should get inside," I said finally, my voice low, careful. She looked at me, the faintest trace of something unspoken in her eyes. A secret. A question she wasn't ready to ask, a confession she didn't want to give. I wanted to lean in, to close the space between us, to see if the warmth I felt was mirrored in her chest, but I froze. The storm raged around us, but in that moment, all I could feel was her presence, and the electricity of almost touching, almost knowing, almost saying what neither of us could. Then her friend's voice called from the lobby, cheerful and oblivious, and she straightened, wiping her hands on her pants. The spell broke. I stepped back instinctively, the charged air snapping into something mundane, like it had never existed. We said nothing more. She disappeared down the hall, and I watched until the storm hit her entirely. My chest ached from restraint, from the taste of what could have been, and I realized I'd spend hours replaying that moment, the brush of her fingers, the almost smile, the silence that said everything words never could. I stayed behind in the rain, letting it soak me, letting the tension linger, knowing we were closer than ever yet impossibly far apart. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. Something unspoken, urgent, and entirely forbidden. I found her in the supply room again, only this time the fluorescent lights felt sharper, harsher somehow, illuminating the faint lines on her face I hadn't noticed before. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fridge behind her was the only sound, but it seemed louder than it should be. I stepped closer, hesitant. "You okay?" I asked, even though I already knew she wasn't. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let her gaze drift over the rows of towels, her lips pressed together, jaw tight. Then, finally, she looked at me, and it was like she'd been holding something back for years and suddenly decided it was too heavy to carry alone. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice low, almost breaking, but carefully controlled. The words hit me like a stone in the chest. I froze. I wanted to laugh, to deflect, to make a joke, but none of it felt right. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't searching, they were searching for herself, and somehow, I was trapped in the middle of it. I don't know, I admitted, my voice small. My fingers curled into my pockets because I didn't know where to put them. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed too much air. She ran a hand through her hair and sighed, shoulders sagging for just a second. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," she said, and I wanted to argue, to insist it was fine, but I knew she was right. The quiet between us had grown too heavy, too loaded with things neither of us had dared to name. I stepped closer, almost instinctively, and stopped just short of touching her. Close enough to feel her heat through the thin space, close enough that the tension hummed like electricity. "I don't want to hurt you," I said, though my words felt inadequate, like whispering at a hurricane. Her laugh was short, bitter, and unconvincing. "It's not that simple, is it?" she said, looking down at the counter, hands brushing the edges of a folded towel. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly, a subtle betrayal of the calm she tried to maintain. I swallowed, heart pounding. I wanted to reach out, wanted to bridge the distance, but something in her posture told me that even if I did, it wouldn't be enough. Not yet. We stood there in silence after that, breathing the same recycled air, caught between words spoken and unsaid. Her eyes met mine again, and I saw the weight she carried, the decisions, the regrets, the exhaustion of being everything to everyone but herself. And in that gaze, I realized that whatever this was, it had already changed us. Permanently. Finally, she straightened, letting out a shaky breath. I don't even know if I can do this," she said, voice barely audible, and the admission hit me harder than anything I'd expected. I wanted to ask her what this meant, to reassure her, to promise her something, anything. But I knew the truth. There was no promise I could make. There was only the raw, painful honesty of the moment, and the shiver of connection that both terrified and enthralled me. And then she left the room, her footsteps slow, deliberate, and I stayed behind, staring at the counter, thinking, I can't stop wondering if she's breaking as much as I am. I didn't expect her to invite me into the storage office that afternoon. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old paper, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently above us. She held a small cardboard box, hesitant, like it contained something she'd been carrying for years, something fragile. I don't usually show this to anyone, she said quietly, voice low, almost ashamed. She set the box down on the table and opened it carefully, revealing a stack of photographs, letters, and old tickets, little pieces of a life that had existed before this job, before me. I glanced at her, unsure how to respond. She caught my hesitation and offered the faintest of smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's just memories, she said. Memories I wasn't ready to look at for a long time. I nodded, trying to stay calm. My hands itched to reach out, to touch the edges of the photos, but I didn't. I wanted her to feel safe, not exposed. She pulled out a photograph of a man, younger than me, laughing with her at some forgotten cafe, hands tangled with hers. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she traced the image with her thumb. He was my first real heartbreak, she admitted, barely above a whisper. I thought I'd never stop loving him. I lost him in a way I still can't explain. Her voice cracked slightly, and I felt the room shrink around us, the box and its contents suddenly monumental. I swallowed. I didn't know, I said, voice tight. She shook her head slowly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Most people don't. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not family. I just moved on, I guess. I wanted to say something comforting, but the right words weren't there. Instead, I found myself reaching for the edges of a letter she handed me, fragile, worn at the corners. Her eyes met mine, vulnerable, raw, and I realized she was letting me see a part of her she never showed anyone. The silence stretched between us, heavy and intimate. My chest ached, not just for the story she'd shared, but for the weight she carried quietly, alone, for so long. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to carry it anymore, that she didn't have to do everything herself, but I stopped myself. The moment was hers. I had to respect that. Then she laughed softly, almost embarrassed, the sound like a whisper of wind through cracked windows. You look like you're going to cry, she said, half teasing, half serious. I shook my head, trying to smile, but the truth was lodged somewhere in my throat. I couldn't stop thinking about her bravery in opening this box, in letting someone in, even someone like me. She leaned back slightly, and I noticed her hands trembling just enough to make the air between us feel fragile. I haven't shown anyone this in years, she admitted again, quieter this time. Thank you, for just being here. I nodded, heart tight, and for the first time, I realized how much just this, mattered. Not a touch, not a kiss, not a grand gesture. Just being present, noticing, holding space. And then, as she closed the box slowly, sealing it with gentle care, I felt a seismic shift inside me. Something had changed irreversibly, quietly, and completely. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew I would never look at her the same way again. I found her sitting on the low steps outside the hotel, the evening air crisp and quiet. The storm from yesterday had passed, leaving the city slick and glinting under the streetlights. She had a cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, knees drawn up, and for a long moment, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us was different now, full, weighty, not empty. You stayed late again, she said softly, not looking at me. I shrugged, leaning against the railing nearby. I guess I like the quiet. My eyes traced the lines of her profile, the way her hair caught the light, the soft tilt of her chin, the tired curve of her shoulders that somehow still carried grace. She let out a small sigh, finally turning to face me. I keep thinking about everything, she said, voice low, hesitant. About choices I've made. About people I've lost. About this. Her gaze flicked to mine, searching, and I felt something shift, subtle but undeniable, like the world had leaned just slightly toward us. I stepped closer, careful. Not rushing, not demanding. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, I said. Not words. Not labels. Just, here. Her lips pressed together for a beat too long. Then she nodded. And just like that, the tension between us softened, not gone, not resolved entirely, but held in a fragile, mutual understanding. I sat down beside her on the steps, leaving a respectful space, but close enough that our shoulders brushed. Small, almost insignificant, but it felt like everything. We didn't speak for a long time. The city hummed around us, distant horns and footfalls, but inside that little bubble, the air vibrated with all the things neither of us had dared to name. I noticed her hand inch closer to mine, hovering, unsure, as if testing the boundaries. I reached slowly, letting our fingers touch lightly. Not a grip, not a declaration, just presence, quiet acknowledgement of the thread that had been weaving between us all along. She breathed out a laugh, soft, almost shy. I never thought, she started, voice trailing, then stopped. I didn't ask her to finish. I didn't need to. The truth was here, between the brush of her fingers against mine, in the way we sat together, shoulder to shoulder, letting time stretch around us. The air felt warmer somehow, carrying all the words we hadn't spoken, all the moments we'd shared, all the small things that had pulled us together without either of us realizing it. She leaned just slightly toward me, enough that our foreheads nearly touched, eyes half closed, as if trusting me with the space she'd kept guarded for years. And I let her, because it wasn't about possession or confession. It was about understanding, about being with someone who finally made sense in a way nothing else did. I exhaled slowly, chest light and heavy all at once, feeling her fingers relax against mine. The quiet settled around us, not empty now, but full and earned. We stayed like that until the streetlights flickered and the distant hum of the city reminded us time had passed. And still, I didn't move. I didn't need to. Nothing needed to be said. Because in that shared silence, I knew we had arrived somewhere inevitable. Something that had taken months, moments, and small gestures to build, and now simply existed, quietly, completely. It's funny how some moments sneak up on you years later and still feel like they happened yesterday. I remember that night, the quiet steps, the rain-soaked streets, the way her hand found mine without asking. I didn't understand it fully then, not the weight of what had started between us, not the slow, patient way two lives could entwine without anyone shouting it from rooftops. Looking back now, I realize how much changed, not in dramatic gestures, not in perfect lines of dialogue, but in the little things. I learned to notice the way someone moves, the small tremor of hesitation, the strength hiding in the curve of a shoulder. She learned she could let someone see her without losing herself. And somewhere between awkward silences and shared coffees and quiet storms, we discovered that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lingers in the spaces between words, in a glance held too long, in the warmth of someone simply being there. I remember the first time I saw her truly laugh without restraint, the kind of laugh that seemed to fold away years of exhaustion and regret in an instant. It was the kind of sound that changed the room, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't before, not ownership, not desire, but awe. Awe at the courage it takes to live openly after being hurt, to give a piece of yourself without promise, to trust someone with the quiet gravity of your life. And me. I changed too. I learned patience, the kind that doesn't come from waiting for something obvious, but from being present in the mundane and finding meaning there. I learned that love is less about grand gestures and more about constancy, the steady presence, the willingness to stay even when it's inconvenient or confusing or frightening. We didn't declare anything with fireworks or proclamations. We didn't need to. Our moments were earned in the shared silences, the accidental touches, the late-night conversations that never quite reached their end. We learned to navigate boundaries, regrets, past heartbreaks, and still find a thread that was ours alone. That's what made it real. That's what made it ours. Now, when I think about her, it's never about perfection. It's about presence. It's about understanding that some connections are slow burning, subtle, and messy, and that's precisely why they matter. It's about seeing someone fully, and being seen fully, without pretense, without expectation. And maybe that's the truth I want you to take from this story. Love doesn't always arrive in a rush. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, almost imperceptibly, and when it does, you'll know it not because it shouts, but because it simply fits. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?